Hey everybody, it's Gene Marks and I am talking to you from the floor of the AICPA Engage 2025 conference here in Las Vegas. I am talking to a bunch of accounting professionals, luminaries, and thought leaders that will be sharing what they're doing and where they think the accounting profession is going when it comes to technology, recruiting, and overall firm development. And we're putting together it all in a special episode of Thrive.
Welcome to Thrive, a Paychex business podcast, your blueprint for navigating everything from people to policies to profits. And now your host, Gene Marks.
So let's start things off by hearing from Mark Koziel. He's the president and CEO of the AICPA and the visionary behind this incredible conference. So first of all, Mark, thanks for speaking.
Thanks for having me.
Really glad that you're here. You've been kind of busy. First of all, tell me about the show. Engage. I mean, I'm looking around. We're on the floor right now. There's a zillion people here. It seems like things are going well.
Yeah, 5,000 people this year. The energy is electric. You know, one of the things is I was there at the beginning when we put this together to say, you know, we need to bring these conferences together. And this was always part of the vision.
Yeah.
And, you know, seeing that to give them an opportunity to be together, all 5,000, but then also separate into their tribes,
sure.
To be different and have a sense of community, really important. And it's just the energy, the buzz. We had a lot of great feedback, a lot of great conversations with members over the last 2 days.
Let's talk about technology.
Yeah.
Okay, to start with. So will AI replace us?
No, absolutely not.
Give us your thoughts.
It will enhance what we do. It will allow for us to do different things down the road. I believe we'll see that. You know, I had a slide that I've been using because I'm like constantly. How many times have we heard over our lifespan of accountants being replaced by some level of innovation along the way, right? And so I had to go back in history to figure out that in the 1930s was the invention of the electronic calculator that was going to put us out of business.
Of course.
The 1970s, 80s was the advent of VisiCalc and the spreadsheets. That was going to put us out of business. The personal computer, oh my God, people could do business things themselves on their own computer. That's going to put us out of business. AI, blockchain, we heard about that recently. Yeah. AI most recently.
The overall cloud, workflows, all that stuff. Yep, right.
You know, even some of the technologies who are here today, like Intuit with QuickBooks and TurboTax. TurboTax is going to put the small firm out of business and tax. And every small firm I talk to, they say, I welcome our clients trying TurboTax just once because they're going to realize the value that we bring, and they will mess it up so badly, we'll actually make more fixing it than if we had just done the return ourselves.
So wait, so why hasn't all these technologies put us out of business?
I think because the profession keeps reinventing itself along the way.
Right.
And at the end of the day, and this is what I didn't realize coming into the profession, it's that client relationship that's paramount. So the client is what drives what it is that we do. And as long as we continue to focus on that, they'll allow for us to come and do things for them differently based on what the innovation is allowing us to do. AI is not going to replace you, provided that we can continue reskilling and upskilling you to be able to embrace it and use it differently and interact with the client. I think client accounting services is such a great example.
Yeah.
And we had our AI symposium, AICPA and SEMA in March. And of the 5 insights that we had, number one is that bookkeeping is already automated and it has AI adopted in it. And then bullet number 4 was about advisory services. And advisory services started to see more AI. But we started the conversation, CAS 1.0 conversations 14, 15 years old. Now we're on CAS 2.0, and that conversation's at least 5 to 7 years old.
Sure.
And that's really what AI is creating, is the move from 1.0 transactional to 2.0 advisory. And so upskilling all of those folks we have on our CAS team to be able to say, these are how you should be interacting with your client become paramount.
You talk about upskilling, I just want to dig into that a little bit more. Like, you use Microsoft Office.
Yeah.
And like me and like everybody else, we're using like 10% of what it does.
Yep.
So it's like we're driving a car in Texas in August. and we're not putting on the air conditioner because we don't know where the button is. It's ridiculous. And nobody invests in the training. What I think it's an opportunity for the AICPA, and I'm wondering what the organization might have planned or what you're thinking of to help the profession get upskilled.
Yeah, so we're talking to a lot of the technology-related companies. We already have some of that embedded into like our CAS training of that very directly. Tax has fallen a little bit behind. So tax research is AI-driven right now. And we have a partnership with Blue Jay through CPA.com, and that's just exploding. I mean, everyone's seeing the reliability of that. And but tax prep isn't there yet. But we're having conversations with companies that are looking to get into that. And then audit, it's getting integrated. So, all of the work we're doing around DAS. So it's getting trained up with the tool and how AI integration can happen with it. And then, conferences like these, making sure that we're focused on AI and upskilling its pieces of that, and embedding that into staff level training that we offer as well becomes really important.
As AI reshapes the accounting landscape, Daniel Hood, Editor-in-Chief of Accounting Today, joins me to discuss why mastering change management is essential for the future of the profession. What are you covering in AI and the accounting profession?
No, I think the story of AI really for accountants is adopting, getting comfortable with it. And it's going to be a thing where it's a little bit, there's a whole story about you don't need to know how to build a watch, just need to know how to tell time. Right. For most accountants, it's just going to be about knowing how they can implement it into their practice. Right. They won't know they don't need to know how to build an agent. They don't need to know what an agent does. Right. Well, no, they need to know what it does, but they don't need to know how it does it.
Right.
Right. So I think that's the big story, is getting accountants to realize two things. One, that you need to adopt AI in a big way, in a bigger way than just technology, right? You can't be a grudging sort of, I'll do it because I got to do it. You've really got to get in there, because there will be firms that will absolutely get in there first.
Sure.
And they talk about AI is going to take away people's jobs. It's not AI that's going to be taking away jobs. It's accounting firms using AI that's going to be taking away work and so on. So I think that's the big story, is the need for firms to adopt and get. I'm not going to force them to be enthusiastic about it, but they need to embrace it seriously and take it seriously and work it into everything they're doing.
The demographic of accounting firm partners skews older. I mean, I think like the average age of the U.S. small business owner is like 56 years old, according to it's old. So there's a lot of succession planning, but then there's also a lot of change management issues. Like people just don't want to change. Are you seeing that?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And to be fair to as fair to accountants as we need to be, this is true everywhere, right? Very few people like change, right? I think it's much more true of accountants, in part because that's just their nature of their profession. It is a small c, conservative, careful, assess every risk before you do anything kind of thing. That's one of the reasons it's so useful to their clients, right? But it's also, for the longest time, for generations, accounting firms didn't have to change, right? In ways that most other industries did have to at some point or another between roughly 1930 and call it 2000. Most other industries went through some changes or other. Accounting did not.
Right.
So for the older generation, you talk about the higher up. They never had to change, and their bosses never had to change. So it's not built into their DNA to sort of say, well, at some point we're going to face a change. Now they're facing this enormous tsunami of change, just as every other industry is.
Sure.
But they have no history of it, and they have no muscles for it. And that's why that change management skill, people ask, what's the biggest thing for accountants? I think building the muscle for change management, learning how to do it, because it's not just going to be one change. And once you finish adapting to this change, there's going to be another one, and another one, and another one. And they're going to be in totally different areas of your practice. Sometimes it'll be a new service area. Sometimes it'll be a new form of recruiting. Sometimes it'll be a new way of marketing. Sometimes it'll be new technologies. But to be able to assess developments, to decide, does this matter to me? Is this going to impact me? Figure out who it's going to impact, figure out who should lead the change.
Sure.
Having that as a muscle, I think, is something that every business, certainly, but accountants in particular, I think are going to need to work really hard to develop.
Building on Daniel's insights on change management, Nicole Ksiazek, Senior Director at Sage, reveals how psychology plays a key role in driving successful change in accounting. Let's hear her perspective. You're going to start up your own CPA practice.
Yes.
What kind of a practice would it be in 2025?
In 2025?
Right now.
Right now, there's a lot of industry focus on family offices. And I think that that's really interesting.
What do you mean by family offices?
So a family office can be, high net worth individuals.
Okay.
But what happens is they have their hands in many different areas of business. So an example is a family office could have trusts set up for all of the children.
I see.
They then own properties in multiple states.
I know exactly what you mean.
They have a farm for the horses that they then work with. So, it's one business, but then you have multiple practices underneath it. So I think that would be really interesting.
That's super cool. And, I know a guy, we're both in the Philadelphia area, so I know a guy who our kids played Little League together. He did just that. He was his own, and he was and still is the accountant for a large real estate developer in the Philadelphia area with lots of developments in the Bluebell and Montgomery County area.
Yes.
And he handled their family business.
Exactly.
And their family business, it was not the real estate, it was everything. You know what I mean? Just like you said. And that is a growth area, particularly
it absolutely is a growth area, especially as we're getting to a point where generational wealth is getting ready to be handed down.
Yeah.
So,
I don't even think you need experience in accounting. You need to be a psychiatrist to do that kind of a work. So I don't know.
Well, so what's really interesting, though, is one of the questions that you had was, what would I have told myself in college?
I was getting to that next, so go ahead. What would you have told yourself?
I would have told myself to major in accounting and minor in psychology.
I can't believe you say that, because if people ask me, if I were to go back to college, what would I take? Same answer. I would take psychology. Why?
I would take psychology because I didn't realize how much of the accounting profession is working with the emotional side of individuals.
Yes.
And all aspects.
Yeah.
Compensation. Everybody gets uptight about the money there.
Yeah.
Mergers and acquisitions. Do I actually do this? What is this going to do to my family if I go through with this? Even making decisions that aren't emotional, but you still have to manage the emotions.
Couldn't agree with you more. And I always think that, accounting, and no disrespect to all of us in the profession, it's not that hard to learn, okay? But being a good psychologist,
Change management.
And change management.
Change management. So, we're dealing with new technology. Many firms come to us and they decide that they're going to use Sage Intacct in their practice.
Right.
One thing that we try to work with them on is to make sure that the change management factors and the education is going up and down.
Right.
And what I mean by that is you have to have leader buy-in, but you also have to have staff buy-in.
Right.
So when you are looking at new technologies, involve the staff in those decisions. We have 3 that we are looking at. I would love for you to test this out and provide your feedback. Was this easy to use? Any concerns? How would you, support this? And that's that change management and psychology. We often find that sometimes individuals think that they need new technology, where it might actually be processes that need to be adjusted. And so then getting back to the psychology, you have to talk them through that side of it.
Yeah.
What are you doing now? What would you like to do? And not what would you like to do in the next month? What would you like to do in the next 6 to 12 months? And how can you work together to make sure that you're making the right decisions for your firm or for your business or for your family practice to make sure that you can move forward effectively?
With AI being such a hot topic at Engage and everywhere else these days, Roman Kepcyk, Director of Firm Technology Strategy at Rightworks, explains why CPA firms need an AI policy and how to create one. Obviously, and it's been a while since you and I have talked, and a lot has changed over the past 10 minutes, let alone the past 2 years. What are you seeing? You speak at so many conferences. You deal with CPAs all the time. Do you find that most CPAs are still confused or still in the dark about AI, still tentative about using it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the class I taught this morning, we do a survey, how many firms actually have a generative AI policy in place. And 2 years ago, it was 20%.
Yeah.
This morning, it was maybe 24, 25%.
Unbelievable.
And these are medium and large firms that know better.
Tell me about what should be in an AI policy.
Well, actually, you can ask ChatGPT or Claude, and it'll give you a great
exactly what I
policy. It is so
Best
good.
place to go for an AI policy is
because
ChatGPT.
it knows it.
Yeah.
But the first step, like for all of our firms, that has to happen is you have to set the ground rules, which is the policy, and you have to educate everyone because there's a lot of shadow AI going on.
Yeah.
Everyone has on their phones, which unfortunately also has their Outlook, their Teams.
Yeah.
So the data's flowing in, and so. Up until January of this year, we were pretty much just promoting education on generative AI, how to use ChatGPT, how to set up the policy, how to set up your subject matter experts to identify opportunities for tools.
Okay.
I do a tax debrief session that we identify those problem areas and then we have them look for solutions for generative AI that's there. But I think the big thing that's going to happen, that the change for me in February, was this whole agentic AI.
Yeah.
Once OpenAI developed the Model Context Protocol, the MCP protocol,
Yep.
all of a sudden, all of us who are Microsoft-centric or Google-centric or Amazon-centric, we realize now ChatGPT, which writes Copilot,
Yep.
this is a tool that can allow us to connect to different databases. So I think the most significant thing that we're trying to educate people on now is you need to have that baseline of understanding generative AI.
Yep.
But be ready and
For
educating,
agentic AI.
yeah, and understanding what it is and teaching your people to look for it.
Next up, Sabrina Parris, president at Honeycomb State Tax Strategies, talks about the surprising connection between beekeeping and bookkeeping. She also shares why smaller firms play a crucial role in the industry and reveals what sets the great ones apart. So first of all, Sabrina, Honeycomb State Tax Strategies. Why Honeycomb?
So I'm a beekeeper.
You are?
Yeah, just a hobby beekeeper.
Why didn't you tell me that before we started talking? That was going to take up our whole conversation. So you're a beekeeper in North Carolina.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that like a bee-friendly state?
It is,
okay.
for sure, yeah. So it's funny, my newest batch of bees not doing great this year, but every year's different. But yeah, I really kind of was thinking about how kind of like the bees are so strategic and how they set everything up. And I thought that really tied in really well with what I want to do, which is kind of think about big picture strategy and help CPAs with their clients in that regard.
That is, first of all, you know what? To heck with this conversation. I have a million questions to ask you about beekeeping. I guess that'll have to be another time for another day. But, why state tax strategies? Does that mean you focus on just state and local things?
Yes. So I started my career at Deloitte long time ago, about 20 years ago, and I was in the multi-state group.
Right.
Our group didn't do any compliance. We just did research. It was attorneys and CPAs, and it was all research and strategies that would support the compliance groups.
And this was in North Carolina as well?
It was, Charlotte office.
God.
And I moved to Hickory, just an hour away, but much different client base there, smaller CPA firms. And what I realized was that smaller CPA firms do have that need, but it's not as frequent, and they don't really have the resources for it, right?
Yeah.
They can't have a full-time SALT person necessarily,
right.
And don't really know where to go. And when the pandemic hit and a lot of employers were dealing with, letting their employees work all, and suddenly it was a big problem for a lot of CPAs, right? Like this thing that they hadn't had to give much thought to. And what I hate to see is for CPAs who have very good clients to tell those clients, hey, you've outgrown me, I'm going to refer you to a bigger firm. What I'd like to see them do is keep those clients and then bringing subject matter experts as needed.
Sure. I mean, really, like, state tax in North Carolina is that complicated? I mean, you guys are such an easygoing state. Is that complex?
I wouldn't say North Carolina in particular. I think it's more kind of how Nexus works and how allocation and apportionment works. And, a lot of this is just, it's not something I see a lot of like first and second years and even seniors really getting exposure to that.
You've worked with a bunch of CPAs, both individuals, small firms, regional, larger firms or whatever. You must have come across a lot of firms that you are like, these guys are crushing it. Like, I love these guys.
Yeah.
They run a great firm. This kind of firm I would work for if I were, crazy enough to want to do that. What is it about without naming names?
Sure.
what is it about those firms?
The cool thing about AICPA Engage is that's where you're going to meet a lot of those people, and that's where you're going to get a lot of their ideas because they're very generous with their ideas.
Talk to me about some ideas. What have you heard?
Automate everything you can, but again, like don't automate out yourself, right? Like don't automate out the human element. You don't want your clients just talking to robots all the time, but whatever you can automate so that you can really make those like human interactions worthwhile, like that's. And so they invest in the technology, they invest in the people, they make sure their company is a good place to work.
Sure.
And a lot of the other things kind of fall into place.
Right. So what about culture in those firms? Like what firms have you run across where you're like, this is like just a good place to work? Like,
right.
What do they do?
So they spend a lot of time on the front end making sure people are a good fit. And my personal philosophy with hiring is that technical skills can be taught. You know, if someone, as long as they have the minimum requirement, an accounting degree, some experience, maybe not if they're fresh out of school. But the real important thing is, what kind of problem solving skills do they have? What kind of people skills do they have? Do they work well in a team? And if you can start structuring your interviews and your hiring process and your recruiting process to really get to the root of what are your core values as a company, and how do you find potential employees that fit those core values, and then the technical stuff can fall into place.
Why is the accounting profession struggling to attract fresh talent? Calvin Harris, the CEO of the New York State Society of CPAs, dives into the heart of the issue, offering valuable insights on what's behind the recruitment gap. Are you a CPA?
I am.
I
am a CPA.
And you still maintain your certification?
I maintain my license. I don't practice, but I'm licensed here in New York. Well, we're not here in New York right now, but I'm licensed in New York and Maryland,
Right. So did you do that? Like, what were you doing before you took over the society?
Yeah, let's see. I was the chief financial officer at the National Urban League in New York.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
So why did you keep your certification through all of that? Because I have my own reasons, but I'm curious.
Well, look, I'd say the first thing is that I worked pretty doggone hard to get that thing.
I worked my ass off for that. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
There you go. So part of it is just a point of pride.
Yeah.
Pride. I'm proud to be a CPA.
Yep.
And I don't have any regrets on becoming a CPA. Now, in New York, the way New York defines the practice of accountancy, I didn't have much of a choice in terms of getting licensed in New York to stay appropriate. But now in New York, you know, as CEO, you can make a case that I don't necessarily need it in the same sort of way.
Sure.
But I'm active. I do the CPE and everything. I have renewals coming up before the year's up. So
it's funny with me as well. Like I love the profession. Yeah. I've always been passionate about the profession.
Yeah.
I'm like you, super proud to be part of it or whatever.
Absolutely.
Why do we have a recruiting issue?
Yeah, you know, I think it comes down to relevancy and just not telling good stories. We lean too hard into things that are not going to appeal to anyone. And I think if we go back to our younger selves, we should sometimes ask ourselves, would I be interested in that?
Yeah.
And
well, give me an example. Like, what do you mean?
Easy. Anyone during a busy season, whether taxation, audit, or whatever, to where they're saying, I'm working 8 hours a week, or I'm working 90. I had to sleep at my desk, get this thing done. And you say that to a group of students.
Yeah, it's not great. That is not
I'm
great.
pretty sure they don't want to hear that.
Yeah.
Now, might that have happened? I mean, there's a whole different conversation on whether there's a way you could structure your business so you don't have to have that be your experience. But for goodness sake, no one wants to hear that.
Yeah.
Not if you want to recruit them in.
Yeah, it's not a badge of honor. It really isn't.
Not
and
anymore.
It's funny. I think it's changed with young. Maybe like back in the day, it was a thing where like, hey, you know, there's 100-hour weeks on Wall Street or there's 80-hour weeks during busy season.
Yeah, about that.
Was like a thing, but like it's changed. I think if you tell that story to a kid right now who's 21 years old and in college, they're like, screw that, man. I don't want to be in that. Do that as a living.
And when you combine that with, you know, that relevancy issue, telling a good story issue, with not always having, even though we're much better, but being competitive in terms of salaries, if we're not competitive enough, and we're all in the midst of a huge licensing movement. New York has its own story to tell on that. But when you combine all those things together, and then you're also hearing, I'm just saying what I've heard.
Yeah.
It's not all true, but I got to take this hard test, and I have to go to school for all these years, and I'm not going to get paid as much as my friend who went to school 1 year less than me. And by the way, I'm going to work my butt off the whole time. Yeah, I don't want to do that. Count me out. Let me let me find another profession.
Our conversation on recruitment continues with Jeremy Wortman, the owner of HRD Initiatives. Jeremy highlights just how crucial a strong company culture is when it comes to attracting and retaining talented CPAs.
I'm an organizational psychologist by training,
Okay.
and I focus on the public accounting world, specifically in talent management, organizational culture. So I'm passionate about helping business leaders be more intentional and strategic about how they hire people and the employee experience they bring and how they retain them.
All right, that is great. Tell me a little bit about that. I mean, hiring and retainage is a huge issue in the CPA profession. Talk to me a little bit about why it's an issue and where you think that's going.
Yeah, so I think it's such an issue because the paradigm shift that I've witnessed with the accounting profession, working with them in over 20 years, is, there are a bunch of technical professionals that back in the day, got a degree, rented some space, started pumping out work.
Yeah.
Well, as they started growing, they started to actually have to hire folks.
Sure.
And build a business. And the old school paradigm is butts in seats, get work out the door. Now they're actually running a business, and they have to think about, wow, what do we have to do to entice somebody to work for us versus anyone else? Because the war for talent is huge, right? And then, again, and I've literally had partners tell me this, Jeremy, I've taken every class I needed to take to be a great technical accountant.
Yeah.
I've never taken a class on how to be a great leader.
Yeah.
So retaining talent is huge because people want to work for good leaders,
Sure.
good bosses. They want to have a meaningful experience, and so that's why culture is so important.
So what do you tell your clients to do? I mean, my son actually is a manager at PwC.
Okay.
And he's a 30-year-old guy, and there's like 4 or 5 generations of people in this workplace. And even people of his generation, I think he's officially a millennial. I mean, he gets frustrated by Gen Zs. You know what I mean? And then the Gen Xs get frustrated with him. And the baby boomers are frustrated with the Gen X, So, what advice do you give to your clients to retain good people and find good people?
That's actually what my session was on 2 hours ago. That's what I spoke for an hour
Give
and
us the
15
highlights.
minutes. And it's funny, real quick about generations. I
Sure.
get asked to speak on that every once in a while. Every time a new generation enters the workforce, Time Magazine does this whole front page episode. And what's interesting is...
It's funny, you're right, because this goes back decades. I remember when I was a kid, they were doing stories on that.
And each generation says almost the same thing about the generation before.
Yes,
They're lazy,
yes.
they don't care,
Yeah.
they don't want to work. So
Yeah.
I think that's comical.
Yeah.
Anyhow, so, my best clients, what they do to attract and retain is they really do make culture a strategic priority. And I ask them to adopt a talent-centric mentality.
Good.
That is, every single person in your company has talent. Agree or disagree? And the entire audience today raised their hand. I agree that. And if we embrace that and help our employees understand what those talents are and how they can bring them to work, they have such a better, meaningful work experience. And so that attracts people because, there's some data points I shared with my group today. People are leaving because of bad bosses. They don't feel like they belong, and they feel like the company doesn't care about them. Yeah. Therefore, strategically focusing on culture pays dividends to attract and retain. But as we were talking this morning, that's a longitudinal process. It takes a long time to make a big change in a company.
Right.
And we're all so short-term focused that I see a lot of firms give up on it because they don't see the change in a short period of time. So that's my thing. That's what I do with firms is really understand how you can create an awesome culture, operationalize it, and then create the supporting talent management strategy that brings it alive.
It's funny. I have some clients that I know their employees are being paid less. They could get better jobs. They could get more highly compensated jobs, and yet they have little turnover.
Yep.
And it's almost like if you're going to spend 8 or 10 hours a day at work, it's kind of like the work itself is almost secondary to just enjoying being at the company,
right,
and who you're working with.
And
right?
There's research that supports that. If there's people are willing to take less money if they're fully engaged, and those engaged employees through all of these other tactics, they work harder for you because they want to, not because they have to. They produce higher quality work, and they're less tempted to answer that recruiter's phone call.
Wrapping up this episode, Sherron Permashwar, principal and CPA at BMP Tax and Accounting Services, dives into why a purpose-driven approach is shaping the future of accounting. But before we jump in, I want to thank you for joining me on this journey through the Engage conference. This was just a sneak peek into the incredible conversations ahead. We'll soon be sharing full episodes on the Paychex YouTube channel featuring these amazing guests and plenty of others. So stay tuned. You don't want to miss it. You work with other CPAs, other CPA firms. I mean, you've known people how long have you been a CPA now?
I've been in the accounting profession for 3 decades.
Okay.
I didn't get my CPA until like 5 years in.
Okay, that's amazing. Okay, so you've met a lot of accountants.
Yes.
Tell me, like, what accountants impress you? Like, when you meet certain accountants or certain accounting firms and you think to yourself, like, these guys know what it's all about, or they are doing a great job, you know, or like, that's the kind of firm that is going to be around for a while, you know? What kind of characteristics do you think those people have that really just impress you?
So it has changed through the decades, right?
Okay.
So what's impressing me now is more towards behavioral finance,
okay,
right? So the accounting way of doing things in a box and the numbers, like you said, you can ask ChatGPT for certain things.
You can.
The numbers are something that I think you can ask for, so we have to think differently about our profession now. It's our behavior, our energy, our positivity.
True.
Moving forward with technology, we did not touch that.
Right.
But moving forward with technology, I totally believe anything, if used good, can work. AI is amazing. I am an accountant, not a writer. So writing emails and writing letters and writing all these memos used to take me a long time because AI helps me with that. I mean, it doesn't take me. I use it as a tool. I don't have it work for me.
Sure.
I change so many things around. I don't like a lot of things that it says, so I move it. But it helps me organize. It saves me time. So embracing all of that is that the form of the future.
Right.
Yeah. And more communication.
Right.
So every generation wants to know what they want to be involved. Just like medicine, it used to be take 2 of this pill and call me in the morning. We don't know what we took. We don't know what we have. We don't have anything. In accounting, it's the same thing.
It is.
You have to. Everybody wants to know, what are they investing in? Why are they investing in?
Sure.
Why are you telling me to do this? Why are you telling me to do that? So the communication between what's happening is so important.
Sure.
And accountants are not used to doing that, so that's our issue.
And it's funny too, because I've always felt that the old school of accountants, and listen, no offense on them, and this is the way they were brought up and the way the generation was, just weren't the greatest communicators in the world.
Absolutely not.
You just said it. It's like you need to learn about the person. You have to have bedside manner.
Manner.
And there was a lot of stories behind people's finances and companies' finances.
Their
mindset. And a lot of people growing up in the profession weren't taught to do that.
No.
I think younger generations get that.
They get that. They want their purpose. That's the thing about our pipeline issue too, is if you explain to them why they have a purpose,
sure,
you will get much more productive employees
sure,
when they have a purpose.
Sure.
It's not just a job anymore that you do. It has to have a purpose.
Great. Do you have a topic or a guest that you would like to hear on Thrive? Please let us know. Visit payx.me/Thrive topics and send us your ideas or matters of interest. Also, if your business is looking to simplify your HR, payroll, benefits, or insurance services, see how Paychex can help. Visit the resource hub at paychex.com/works. That's WORX. Paychex can help manage those complexities while you focus on all the ways you want your business to thrive. I'm your host, Gene Marks, and thanks for joining us. Till next time, take care.
This podcast is property of Paychex Incorporated 2025, all rights reserved.